Okay. Okay, Vino Madonino Hino Aleno Mase Adeno Kone Nadeno Mase Adeno Cornel. We're going to continue our shiur. I'd like to dedicate the shiur tonight to Lilu Nishmat Daniel Menachem Mendel Ben Avraham Ruach Adonai Tenchenu Began Eden. Tonight's his yahrzeit.
Yeah.
So may his neshama have aliyah. On the date of his yahrzeit, we're going to learn Divrei Torah to elevate his neshama. Okay. As a Jew, it's important not just to know that we're right, but to know why we're right. Yes? One can imagine that there's 2.7 billion Christians, 1.5 billion Muslims. That's a lot of people. And how many Jews are there in the world? 16 million? So if we just put up a vote, we lose. And if we put up a vote any time in the history of man, we would lose. So obviously it doesn't go by the masses. I'm not going to say the statement that everybody always knows. Masses doesn't mean anything, right? And if one thinks back, the beginning was Avraham Avinu. And Avraham Avinu was alone in the world. Whatever there weren't 7 billion people, but Avraham was the only one who believed that there was one God. And he maintained that belief steadfastly and convinced other people to his way of thinking at great personal risk. And he had to move from one place to another, yes? So we see that just because there are so many people that disagree with us or have a different way of looking at things doesn't mean that we're wrong. But I don't think it's sufficient for a person just to say, well, it feels good. This is what I was brought up. Of course, that's right. We have to know that we're right. I did a whole series once of classes for teenagers on why the Jewish people are right and everybody else is wrong. They're still on my YouTube channel. I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. So as we're coming to the holiday of Matan Torah, which regardless of which of the monotheistic religions you are attached to, a person is attached to, Matan Torah is a massive event. It's the time in history where God gave his message to the people, entire nation. And if one thinks about it, that's one way we can understand. If we look at the episode of Matan Torah, which is a once in a history event, never again was there an event like Matan Torah. And that technically was the beginning of what we would say Am Yisrael. Because what makes us Jew? What makes us Yisrael? Okay, we're a descendant of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Yaakov is called Yisrael, so we're Bnei Yisrael. But at what point do we actually become a nation? A nation has to have a constitution, a group of laws. And that's what the Torah is for us, in addition to many, many other things. What makes the Jewish people unique is if you look at the beginnings of other religions and compare, every religion has to have a starting point, yes? So we'll get to the starting point for ours, which is, of course, is Matan Torah. What's the starting point of Christianity?
Jesus.
One would think that the starting point of Christianity is Jesus, but that's really false, because Jesus was born a Jew, died a Jew, and many people would agree that if Jesus came back alive today and saw the religion that's based on his life, he would not recognize that at all. So while Christianity, it's not a religion of Jesus, it's a religion that is around Jesus. But the real formation of the religion was Paul. And how did Paul know he was right? There's a pattern that you're going to see. We'll talk about the two major religions, and then we'll come back, two major monotheistic religions, and then we'll come back to Judaism and see how the pattern is very different. So how did Paul, he was initially persecuting the Christians, the Jewish Christians. There was no such thing as Gentile Christians, yes? How did he come to this conclusion? Did he hear Jesus speak once and say, oh my God, what an amazing speech. What a Devar Torah. Holy moly, I'm going to change my life? No, he never met him. Paul never met, at least from what he claims, is the living. He met supposedly the resurrected, but that's what he says. Paul had a vision on the way to Damascus. That's what it says in their Bible. And based on that vision that he had, that's when he was told that he is now going to be the one to bring the message of Jesus to the Gentile world. How did he know what Jesus said? One would say that if you were Paul and you had this unbelievable vision that this Jewish guy who died 3 years before tells you that you have to go and speak my words that I've given over to the rest of the world, where's the first place you would go? Obviously, you can't go to Jesus since he's dead. Where would you go? You go to the apostles. You go to James. You go to Peter. And you say, hey, listen, I had this amazing vision. Please tell me a little bit, because obviously we know Jesus didn't write anything, right? So what did he say? What do I have to teach other people? But that's not what Paul did. Paul basically invented the entire religion. He had this vision. He probably heard about this guy, Jesus, because he knows he was going to persecute the Christians. He had this vision. And based on that vision, he created a religion from what he thought. What he thought Jesus would have said. And since Jesus didn't write anything, we have no idea what he put into writing. We have no idea what he really said. The only text that survives to tell us is the text of Paul, which we have 7 letters in the Christian Bible that are authored by Paul, and the rest, which was all that milieu of based on Paul's theology. One man. That's what the religion is. It's all based on one man. We're not talking about Jesus either. We're talking about Paul. And from Paul, he taught one, he taught others, he had influence on others, he was charismatic. And that's how the religion got off the ground. There was a lot of evolution over the first 200-300 years. That's a whole other class into itself, not germane to our topic of conversation. But we see the origin of Christianity is one man. One man who supposedly had a communication with God. And that man was alone when he had that communication with God. It's not like anybody was with him and heard it with him, okay? Okay, he was alone. And then based on that, that is the entire religion is built on that vision that he supposedly had. Did he have it or not have it? Who's there to say yay? Who's there to say nay? Nobody really knows.
Can we not say that about Abraham?
We're going to get to. Now let's go to Islam. Islam, 600 something years later, assuming that the standard Islamic narrative is accurate, and there's a lot of data nowadays to suggest that the standard Islamic narrative is not accurate, that the Quran was not written soon after Muhammad died. It probably wasn't written for 200 or 300 years after Muhammad died. But let's not get into apologetics at this point. Let's just take what the standard Islamic narrative is, that Muhammad, who was a pagan, his father was a pagan, all Arabs at that point were pagans. He grew up in a place called Mecca. He was part of a tribe called the Quraysh, and they had 360 deities in Mecca. 360. Why 360? That's how many degrees there are in a circle. And they were surrounded, okay, and there was some kind of stone in the middle, which we now call is called the Kaaba. And there's this stone which represented something for the pagans at that particular time. Yes. And Muhammad was alone in the mountains, and he went into a cave. And he went into the cave, and he had a vision. What was his vision? He saw the angel Gabriel. At least that's what he claims. And the angel Gabriel began to talk to him. And that's the beginning of Islam. And over the course of the next 15 to 20 years of his life, assuming we believe what it says in the standard Islamic narrative, he had continual communication. He, like at any time he had a problem, he would want to take himself another wife, but there was only supposed to have 4. He would go to Allah. Allah would say, sure, go right ahead. You're the prophet. He'd take another wife. He wanted to marry the wife of his adopted son. So the adopted son was willing to divorce his wife so the prophet could marry her. People thought that was very, very strange. How could you do that? Of course, he turned to Allah, and Allah came to him and said, of course, that is totally permitted for you. That's many things there. Once again, one man with a vision, alone, all by himself, in the cave. No one was with him. And that's the entire religion is built on one person. If you look at all religions of the world, they're built on one person. One person with a vision. Now, let's contrast that with Judaism. You mentioned Avraham Avinu. But Judaism doesn't, it's the progenitor. But we can have a discussion whether or not Avraham Avinu was actually a Jew. Right? He's called Ivri. What does Ivri mean? Why was he called Avraham Ivri? No, that's Eved. Why is he called Avraham HaIvri? Because he came from the other side of the Jordan River. The word in Hebrew is Ma'ever Hayaden, on the other side of the Jordan River. Where was Avraham Avinu born? He was born in Mesopotamia, in Ur Kasdim. That's what it says. So he came, so vis-a-vis the people who lived in Canaan, he was from the other side of the Jordan River. That's why he was called Ivri, which is translated into English as Hebrew. So we can say that Avraham Avinu was the first Hebrew. Now, in his time, anyone who came from the other side of the Jordan River was called Ivri. So in his time, he would have not been alone, the only person called Ivri. But vis-a-vis how we look at it now, he's the first Hebrew. Whether or not he was a Jew or not, that's a whole different discussion. Is he technically a Jew? What makes a person a Jew? At what point do the Jewish people become a Jewish nation? Matan Torah. And if you look at the process of Matan Torah, they had to all go to mikveh. We know they had Brit Milah. How do we know they had Brit Milah? Because before they did Korban Pesach, they had to all circumcise themselves, yes? So they're all circumcised before leaving Egypt. The next process of conversion is mikveh. And they all had to go to mikveh. They all had to dip when? At Matan Torah. 3 days before Matan Torah was the process of Tevilah. Also, the ladies had to go to mikveh. And that's why it says, for 3 days you shall not come into contact with a woman. Why were the men commanded for 3 days that they were not allowed to have relations with their wives? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyah. It says, Heyu nechonim lishloshet yamim al tigishu el isha. Be proper for 3 days, do not come close to a woman, which is a clear way of saying men were not allowed to have relations with their wives for 3 days, right before Matan Torah. Why? It wasn't for the men. It was for the ladies. Because a lady is tameh for 3 days after she has relations with her husband. Because as long as there's shichvarat zera that is coming out of her, and that can happen for up to 3 days, she is tame'ah. And so the ladies would be able to have the same experience as the men. Through this revelation on Har Sinai, the men were forbidden to have relations with their wives for 3 days. A man who has relations, he goes to mikveh that night, and he's tahor the next day. It's called tibur, right? So that was for the ladies. So we understand that there was why they all to go to the mikveh, just to become purified. It was actually a conversion process in addition to a purification. If you think about it, we have a mitzvah called Brit Milah. Yes? Tell me where in the Torah we learn the mitzvah of Brit Milah.
Abraham did it to himself.
So is that where we learn? So if you go to Parashat Vayera, which discusses the circumcision, the end of Parashat, the beginning of Parashat Vayera is when he is sick. So the end of Parashat Lech Lecha, yes? That's when he has the Brit Milah, right? Is that where we learn today that a Jew has to have a Brit Milah from the Torah? No. If you open up Sefer Chinuch, the book of mitzvah education, okay, while the mitzvah of Brit Milah is mentioned in Breshit, and that's why Sefer Chinuch will deal with the mitzvah there, where it's learned from is not there. Where it's learned from is Ubayom hashemini imol besar orlato, from Parashat Tazria.
Yeah, it was recently,
We just read it.
a few weeks ago.
Correct.
And
It says, Bayom hashemini imol besar orlato. On the 8th day, you shall circumcise the boy. Yes? From there we learn the halacha, which means all halachot of the Torah, all the 613 mitzvot, are not learned from before Har Sinai. They're all learned on Har Sinai. That's why we say, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Everything comes from Sinai. And even though Breshit was written by Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, nothing is true. No mitzvah is actually learned from Breshit. All the mitzvot are learned from Matan Torah. The source of all the mitzvot is Matan Torah. Okay? So now, what made Matan Torah such an amazing, once in a history experience?
In front of a lot of people, nobody's even claimed it afterwards.
It was in front of
everybody,
everyone, all of the Jewish people, right? Which would have been all the men, which were presumably about 604,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, right? Not including the men below the age of 20, not including the men above the age of 60. Yotzei Tzava, the ones who go out to war, fight. Below 60, above 60, below 20, they don't go to war. So when we count 604,000, it's basically Yotzei Tzava, right? That doesn't include men younger than that or men older than that, and it doesn't include any women. So there were probably close to 3 million people, if we understand just doing the math, right? 3 million people were at Mount Sinai. And how many of those 3 million people had a revelation on Mount Sinai? Everyone had a revelation at Mount Sinai. We are the only religion that has the audacity, the chutzpah, as we would say, to claim that we had a national revelation. Why is that so important?
This was more than one person there.
Because 3 million people experiencing all the same thing at the same time, they can't lie about that. And the Rabbi Kellerman, he has a whole beautiful video on YouTube. I would encourage you to watch it, where he discusses up the 3 possibilities. I'm not going to go into that now, to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that just based on sociology, there's what we are claiming is 100% true. And then he has another place to show that not only is what we claim true, but we have a direct line of transmission from Moses all the way to today. There are people that can trace their lineage, not just their lineage. I'm not talking about their birth lineage. I'm talking about their learning lineage all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Pirkei Avot, what does it do? It traces the learning lineage from Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Yes, it goes forward as opposed to reverse, right? So we understand we have a continuous transmission. There was never a time in Jewish history where there was a break in the transmission. So not only did we have this national experience, but we have a continuous transmission, father to son, teacher to student, from Moshe Rabbeinu and that generation all the way till the modern era. Aside from the fact that we have a book that has almost uniform variability. Every Sefer Torah you look at in the world, whether it be a Sefer Torah that's in Morocco, whether it be a Sefer Torah that's in Egypt, they all are the same. And if you go back in history, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in 1947 in the Qumran caves, people felt that was going to be a proof that we changed our books, right? Why did the Christians feel that we changed our books? Because they changed their books many times. If a verse didn't meet them very, very well, what they did is they changed it. And you know what? In the Quran, they did exactly the same thing, despite their claim that the Quran was given at the creation of the world, and it's the same book, and it's a miracle that the book has no changes in it. That is completely false. And there's people who are doing textual analysis today showing that there are all kinds of variations between all the Qurans, and these are not just mistakes from a sofer. Scribes make mistakes, right? They make a mistake here and there. These are intentional mistakes to change the meaning. So based on what they wanted the narrative to say, they would adjust the words or adjust the language so that would fit what they're looking to say. We know about Jews. We're very crazy in many ways. Sefer Torah gets taken out of the Aron Kodesh, yes? And you open it and you read it. I saw this happen to me this past Shabbat. I'm not sure it was pasul, but it needed a little bit of work. There was a zayin that was missing a piece of the zayin. If let's say the zayin looked like a vav. If we would have called a 10-year-old and say, please, or a 9-year-old, read this letter, and the kid says it's a vav, and this happened to me in a shul, this is probably a year ago. There was an issue with the Sefer Torah in a very commonly read section of the Sefer Torah on the holiday, and I saw the letter, and the letter didn't look right. Of course, the people want to just go weiter, go on. I said, okay, no, let's get a 9-year-old. Had a 9-year-old come, and I asked him a couple of letters to make sure he knew all the letters, and then I asked him what that letter was, and he said that letter is a resh, not a daled. Okay, Sefer Torah is pasul, goes back in the Aron Kodesh, we have to take out another one. So even if a letter, a resh and a daled can change the meaning of a word, yes? There are certain circumstances where there's a break in a letter. It's a shin, yes? But there's a piece of the shin missing. It still looks like a shin, but there's a break in the shin. That Sefer Torah is pasul. You get put back in the Aron, you take out a new one. So we see the Jewish people are very particular about the book, that it has to be exactly like it is. And that's why there's a uniformity of the Sefer Torah throughout whatever congregation you are. There's some variations between Ashkenaz and Sephardi, but these variations have no significant meaning. One's a hey, one's an aleph. Both of them are kosher Sfarim. That's it. That's really what it boils down to. So unlike the rest of the religions of the world, we claim a national revelation and an unbroken tradition. What's that?
Who has the hay? Who has the aleph?
I have to look it up. Look it up. Okay. So now let's go a little bit. Let's look at the parasha. The Rambam, in one of his teshuvot that many people don't realize, he wrote Shelot and Shuvot. He didn't just have a halacha book, which is Yad HaChazakah. People would send him questions, and he would answer those questions. Like all great rabbis, when they're the leader of the generation, people will send questions. So I don't remember the details of what the question was asked, but through his answer, he was answering, what's a Jew's relationship supposed to be with the Gentiles vis-a-vis proselytizing? Now, generally, we Jewish people haven't done proselytizing for a very long time. Most other religions, Christianity, Islam, they proselytize. They want everyone to be their religion. Yes? It's fact, if we have someone who's a Gentile who approaches us and wants to become a Jew, we discourage them up to 3 times. Why do we have that different approach? We have something to hide. We don't want to share what we have. Why is it that other religions proselytize, whereas we don't proselytize? I wonder.
Letting others in could be a problem from inside.
Okay, you might say it's going to make things worse, convert somebody, but that's still not nice. If you have the truth, why are you not sharing it?
Because one has to want it.
They want it. They come to you and they say, I want to be a Jew. You say, no, you don't want to be a Jew. Stay as a Gentile. Someone comes to a Muslim and says, I want to be a Muslim. They make him say a couple of words and he's a Muslim. Christian, they take him, give him a bath, and now he's a Christian. Yes? A Gentile who wants to convert, it's a 9 to 12 to 18-month process of learning and study. Part of that is to make sure that they really want it. Why do we make it so difficult? And why do other people go ahead and we have never forcefully converted people.
Joshua?
Who did he convert?
The three things: die, convert, die,
because that was
be out.
Because they were in our land. They had 3 choices. When he said convert, he didn't mean become a Jew. He mean becomes a ger toshav, which is a Gentile living in the land of Israel, but they have to give up their idol worship, right? So you're on the right track, but not exactly.
God
bless you. Christianity. If you are not a Christian and you die, a person dies, not believing that Yimach Shemo, his blood on the cross, saved your life and saved was your salvation, what is your sword? You go to hell. For how long?
Forever.
Forever. Eternal damnation. There is no path for a non-Christian in Christianity for salvation. The only path to salvation, the only path is
To accept Christ.
to becoming part of the religion. Islam. Even though the Quran gives a little bit of a break to the people of the book, and that's discussed, that could be the Christians, that could be the Jews, yes, it really doesn't like the pagans, okay? But the bottom line is if a person dies, you still have to pay a tax, you're a secondary citizen, you have to pay a tax called the jizya, yes? And if a person dies and has not accepted Islam as their religion, they are also damned to hell. What's the Jewish position?
They don't go to hell so long as they're good.
We have a Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, which we all know. It says, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek le'olam haba. Every Jew has a chelek, a portion in the world to come. Yes? If you look at the rest of the Mishnah, after it proves that from a pasuk, it lists, and these are three people, there are three kings and four regular people that have no chelek in olam haba. So it just told you that every Jew, their default is what? They have a portion in the world to come. But a person can, God forbid, lose their portion in the world to come. And then the Mishnah brings three kings and four common people that lost their chelek olam haba. The three kings it brings are Yerovam ben Nevat, Achav, and Menashe. Those are the three kings that are brought. Yerovam ben Nevat was the first one who broke the kingdom into two parts, yes? There was Achav, who was a Rasha. He had a wife by the name of Izevel, okay? And we also have, and he killed many prophets. And we have Menashe, who killed Yishaya Hanavi, okay? These three kings they were all Jews, and they lost their portion in the world to come based on their behavior. Rabbi Akiva has a discussion, or one of them have a discussion of whether or not Menashe did teshuvah in the end of his life and had chelek olam haba. And that's a discussion in the Gemara. There are four common people. How do you remember the four common people? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled. Aleph is Achitofel. Bet is Bilam. Gimel is Gehazi. And Daled is Doeg. Those are the four common people that the Mishnah brings lost their chelek olam haba. Now, if we analyze those four individuals, we have one individual over there that is not a Jew. Bilam is not a Jew. So by the fact that it says Bilam doesn't have a chelek olam haba, what does that mean? That non-Jews have a portion in the world to come. If one looks at Bilam, there's a reason why he had no portion. So what's the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? A Jew is born with a chelek by the fact that he's a Jew. They can lose their chelek, but if they don't lose their chelek, they have it. A Gentile has to earn that chelek. They're not born with it. That's why it says Kol Yisrael. Yes? A Gentile's not born with the chelek. They have to earn it. If they don't earn it, they don't have it. And how does a Gentile earn chelek olam haba?
Observing the 7 Noahide laws.
7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, which means we understand from here that within the Torah, there are two tracts. There's the original tract, which is 7 laws of Noach. Before Noach, there were only 6. Adam Harishon was given 6 laws. Yes? There was the 7th one that he was not given. It was given to Noach. Ever Minachai. Ever Minachai was given to Noach to eat a limb off of a living animal. Yes? Adam Harishon did need that commandment. Why? He wasn't allowed to have meat. Just like all the generations between Adam and Noah, they were not allowed to have meat. Okay? So the 7 laws of Noah was the original covenant between God and the people of the world before there was a concept of a Jew or a Hebrew or whatever you want to call our people. Yes? And
Proper
those
behavior for all.
and what are the seven laws? And there's one thing about the seven laws, it's not just that they follow the seven laws. They follow the seven laws because they were given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai.
Were they not given to Noah?
They were given to Noah, just like Avraham Avinu was given Brit Milah, and Yaakov was given Gid Hanasheh, and Adam Harishon was given Pru'uvu. But once again, all laws of the Torah, their source for their performance now is Har Sinai, Jew or Gentile.
So you want to say that the laws, the seven Noahide laws,
They were
evaporated?
No, the original covenant was given on to what you call to Noah, yes, but it was affirmed at Har Sinai.
Why does it need to be affirmed if it was already given? Weren't the people supposed to be?
Well, they weren't
that way?
They weren't really functioning that way, though, right? The reason why the Jewish people were a necessary part of the evolution is because the Gentiles were failing in their mission. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in one of his books called The Handbook of Jewish Thought, which I encourage everybody to read, both volumes, volume 1 and volume 2, amazing. He explains things that are incredible. He says over there that God gave the Gentiles multiple opportunities to receive the covenant, the full covenant. The goal was not to keep the Torah just for the Jewish people. The initial goal, if we can understand what that means, what, is that the Torah was supposed to be given to all mankind. But there were multiple failures, starting with Adam eating from the tree, then Cain killing Hevel, and then this time of Enosh when they worshipped Avodah Zarah, and then the time of the flood, and then Migdal Bavel, multiple failures. And after Migdal Bavel, which is at the end of Parashat Noach, yes, that was the beginning of the concept of a nation. Before Migdal Bavel, there was no nation. Everybody spoke the same language. There was humankind. When they gathered together to rebel against God, whatever they did to rebel against God, yes, that's when God spread them out. Now there's a concept of a nation. And now we have the concept of, since there's going to be nations, I'm going to pick one nation that will be a kingdom of priests. That's why in Har Sinai, what it say, V'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, which means Har Sinai was the affirmation of what? The Jewish people's position as the Kohanim of the world. And now but even up until that point, up until Har Sinai, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan explains, there were opportunities for nations to become part of the covenant. Not the covenant of Noah, the covenant at Sinai, the Torah. Yes? And that's why there's Midrash that says that he went around to all the nations and asked them, what would you like to accept the Torah? And they asked what's written inside. And then God told them the one mitzvah that they could not do. Yes? Until they came to the Jewish people, and Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma, like we discussed last night. That Har Sinai episode closed the door for Gentiles as a nation to become under the covenant. But it did not close the door for Gentiles as individuals to come under the covenant. And because, according to our religion, a Gentile that behaves according to the Torah's prescription, which is the 7 laws of Noah given to Moshe and Har Sinai for what's written in the Torah, therefore that Gentile has a portion in the world to come. If he has a portion in the world to come, why does he have to convert?
Wants a better portion.
Okay, there's no question about it. The one would understand that the more service one does, potentially the portion might be better, but there's a risk. What's the risk?
That you lose it.
Yeah, because you go from 7 to 613. So we discourage Gentiles from converting. We explain to them, all you need to do is give up your false beliefs, recognize there are 7 laws that were given to Moshe, given to Noah, and then reaffirmed at Har Sinai for the Gentiles of the world. Yes. And if you follow those 7 laws in their details, it's really not 7, it's really 70. It's 7 categories of law, but we'll leave that alone for now. Okay. And if you follow these laws in their detail, because they are commanded to you through Moses on Mount Sinai, you have a portion of the world to come. There is no reason for you to convert. You don't have to give up your lobster and your snails and your octopus. You can continue to eat all that stuff. You don't have to follow Sabbath. Now, if the Gentile says, but that's not satisfactory to me, I want to go all in, I want to be part of this nation, then we remind him that what? It's tough to be a Jew. If he's a guy, we let him know very quickly, you're going to need a surgery. That's why I think there's like 3 times as many women convert than men. Okay, you need a surgery. You have to give up a lot of stuff. It's an amazing way to live, and it's certainly a select way, but you don't have to do that. Since other religions have no salvation pathway for people that don't adhere to the religion, they want to convert you because they feel bad that person's going to go to hell. They want to bring you the message that is salvific. We say there are 2 paths. You can just follow the path that you were born into, and it's no problem. And we also remind them something else. There's no backseas. If you come across into our team, and then later on you decide, you know what, I want to go back, there's no backseas. You can't go back. That's why the process of conversion is 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. And you have to make sure they're not converting because they want to be married to a certain woman who's Jewish. Because if that relationship falls apart, then their desire to be part of the religion falls apart. So you have to verify all this stuff because you could be making it worse for them by converting them. And that's how we Jews, that's why we don't proselytize. Coming back to the Rambam has a unique opinion based on this teshuvah. And he says, no, the Jews do have a mission to proselytize. Because why shouldn't you give them the truth? Okay? The Christians are in a bad place. According to many, what they're believing is complete idol worship. It's idolatry. So a Jew should go to a Christian and talk to them. Shouldn't wait for the Christian to ask a question, but should go and ask. You should go and talk to them. Interestingly enough, regarding the Muslims, the Rambam says, don't talk to them. Why? Why is it part of the Jewish mission, according to the Rambam, to potentially bring Christians, at least underneath the fold of Ben Noach or in Judaism, but not Muslims?
Muslims aren't practicing idolatry.
You would think that's what he says, but that's not the answer. Some of their practices, by the way, are idolatrous. Even though they have a rudimentary concept of a monotheistic God, and in the first chapter of this book that we've been learning, Kalach Pitchei Chochmah, they already failed on that. They don't have that belief. Okay? So the belief of a Jew of a monotheistic is very different, even though they believe in one God, right? They're not idolaters per se, but they have various practices that are idolatrous. For instance, part of their Hajj is they go to Mecca, and they go around the stone 7 times. First of all, the stone, doesn't anybody ask any questions? What's with the stone? What does that have anything to do? That was a avodah zarah that was worshipped by the people, the Arabic peoples, for hundreds or even maybe 1,000 years before. They go around the stone. Why do they do it? Because that was the practice of the tribes, what they would do when they would come to the stone. They would go around. They do something where they go in, they go out. There's all kinds of practices they do. These are all based in idolatry. They brought it into monotheism, but they're still idolatrous practices. Okay? That's not the reason. What's the reason the Rambam says we have a sort of a mission to talk to the Christians but not talk to the Muslims?
Because the Christians believe in our book.
That's exactly right. Very, very good. Because with the Christians, you have a point of reference that you agree on. There is no Christian on the planet
Will deny Moshe.
who will deny that what it says in the Hebrew Bible is the word of God. They can't say that. And the reason they can't say that is because their entire religion is much of it is based on the Hebrew Bible. And in the Christian Bible, there are about 300 citations of the Hebrew Bible in the Christian Bible. And the Christian Bible is very small. It's only got 3,000 or 4,000 verses, unlike the Hebrew Bible, which has about 24,000 verses. So a lot of the content of the Christian Bible is from the Hebrew Bible. Mind you, it's from the Septuagint and not from the Hebrew part, because the authors of the Christian Bible had no clue. They didn't speak Hebrew, they didn't read Hebrew, they didn't know Hebrew, but they spoke Greek, they read Greek, so therefore they read the Septuagint. And even though there were mistakes there, we'll leave that alone. So, and that's why there's discrepancies between what it says in the Christian Bible, what the verse is in Hebrew, and what it says in Hebrew, which is very, very different. So this so because they believe we have the same book, when you have a discussion with a Christian, you can say like this: everything we're going to talk about has to be something we both agree is holy, something we both agree has spiritual value. And we can both agree that every single verse of the Hebrew Bible, from Genesis all the way to Divrei Hayamim, or in their Bible up until Micha, or Malachi, which is in their book, the last book, yeah? But they have all our books, they just order is different, yes? They don't divide them into Tanakh, it's a little different. But suffice it to say, all the books are the same. The verses are a little different because they break it up differently, yes? I'm not going to get into that now, but suffice to say, the content, the book is the same. The only question is, what are the meanings of the verses? Whereas a Muslim, it's very different. Their book is the Quran. They do not hold that the Hebrew Bible has any spiritual validity. And the reason for that is they claim we changed our books. They claim what was given to Moses on Sinai was the Quran, and we changed it. So therefore, there's no point of discussion. There's nothing to talk about. Whereas a Christian, it's very, very different. That's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says, with a Christian, you have a point to talk about. Okay. Any questions on that so far? All right. So we know we're right for first, and the easiest, quick reason is because, and I think it's also important to learn why they're wrong, so we can understand why we're right. But it's also important to know, it says, Dama lahashiv lapikoros, a person has to know what to answer a denier, what a person's going to answer someone who is right. So I think it's also important to have an understanding of what their position is and why it's wrong. But we're going to focus today on what our position is and why we're right. Okay? So the Hebrew Bible, okay? Of course, no one in the world disagrees that the language of the Hebrew Bible is Hebrew. There are certain sections of the Hebrew Bible, like Ezra and Nehemiah, that are in Aramaic, or partially in Aramaic. Daniel, part is Hebrew, part is Aramaic, okay? But the majority of the content of the Hebrew Bible is in Hebrew. No one disagrees with that. Now, if you are a Jew, why is it so important to learn Hebrew? Because when you read a book, it's important to understand the original language. Because if I'm reading a section of the book that's translated into English, it's not a translation. It's automatically an explanation. Because words can be translated in different ways depending on how you view what your thoughts are, right? So if you look at a Hebrew, authentic English translation of the Hebrew according to our religion, yes? So if you look at the Art Scroll, it's going to translate the word as young woman, alma, which means young woman. Whereas if you go to the King James Version and you look what it says there, it translates alma as virgin. And part of the problem is we don't have an agreed upon text. We can read the text in its original language. Most Christians cannot. They don't even read their Bible in its original language. They read a translation of a translation of a translation. Okay? And even the Hebrew Bible, they're reading a 3-4 translation. Every translation is an explanation. If you look at Onkelos, if you look at Yonatan ben Uziel, when they're translating the Pasukim into Aramaic, they are explanations. Onkelos is more authentic directly to the texts, so he's not going to go off the reservation. He's going to translate word for word, but even with Onkelos, there are certain things he doesn't translate exactly. He gives it a little bit of an explanation. Yonatan ben Uziel will go off the reservation on a translation because his is more of an explanation in Aramaic. So now, how do we know that we're right? So we're reading the Bible in its original language, and that's why it's so important for a Jew to understand Hebrew.
So the Christians
Even if
are doing our work for us.
Why they're doing our work for us?
They're bringing people back to the Old Testament.
Okay.
They're priming everybody else.
Okay, the Rambam asks a question at the very end of the Ad Chazakah. What was the purpose of Christianity and Islam? Right? And he writes that the purpose of the Christianity and Islam is to bring all the people to a place where they have a concept that there is one God. Even though the Christians have a very, very foreign concept of God vis-a-vis Judaism, and anyway, they're still, not as pagan as they were, 2,000 years ago. Okay, they may have an idolatrous type of understanding of God and how He manifests Himself in the world, but are they pagans? No. That's a whole question. They're not pagans, but their thought processes are wrong. So we can look at the Bible, preferably in Hebrew, with an authentic translation, right? But if you understand the Hebrew, even if you don't understand the Hebrew strong, but you can connect the words, then you could look and say, oh, that's really what it says. And then you have an ability to understand much deeper what we really say. So in Parashat Bechukotai, it discusses all of the curses. Yes, there's curses that are going to happen because we discussed last night, because we were dispassionate with God. We didn't follow the Shemitah. We didn't allow the land to lay fallow once every 7 years. So what did God do? He kicked us out for 70 years. So for each Shemitah that we missed, He kicked us out for those years. The land has to have its rest. It's either going to have its rest every 7 years, or it's going to have its rest in 70 years. But anywhere you go, the land is entitled to its rest. Okay? And that's why Parashat Bechukotai discusses the concept of the Shemitah. And because we didn't observe the Shemitah properly, which takes a tremendous amount of faith, we didn't observe it properly. That's why we were kicked out of the land. The destruction of the temple is because of the three big sins: idol worship, murder, and adultery. But being kicked out of the land of Israel is specifically because we didn't follow the Shemitah. That's what the Torah seems to suggest. Yes?
But the Shemitah isn't being followed when we're not there, so what's the point of kicking us out? How does that rest?
The land has its rest. You didn't allow the land to have its rest, which means you didn't allow 1 year every 7 for the land to be resting. So you get kicked out, the Jewish people get kicked out, so the land has its rest because there's nobody working the land because you're kicked out.
But there's whoever is left in Canaan, that they use the land.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, is that a true statement, what you just said? How can I prove to the statement you just made is false?
You could say that the Ottomans left it in ruins for a long time, but the Romans used it.
You have no greater witness to what the land of Israel was like when the Jews weren't there than Mark Twain. Samuel Clemens. Mark Twain, his real name was Samuel Clemens, wrote a book called Innocents Abroad. He was wealthy, he was Christian, and he went on a world tour. That's what you have when you have so much money back then, you know what to do with it. So you went on a cruise around the world, shall we say, right? And because he was also an author, he wrote about his experiences in the book called Innocents Abroad. And if you look at Innocents Abroad, the highlight of his trip, what he was most enthusiastic was seeing Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and Jerusalem. And if you read his words, it's a couple of pages. It's not that hard. If you want, I'll send it to you. You can read it. I think it's very worthwhile reading. It's almost, for him, anticlimactic. He built himself up in his mind that the Holy Land is something that is so amazing. And he gets there. All he sees are swamps. He sees roads with rocks. And he writes, I can't tell the difference between the road and off the side of the road, because there's rocks in the road and there's rocks off the side of the road. He said he would walk for miles and not see a person. And then when he gets to Jerusalem, it's in decay, it's decrepit. Of course, Mark Twain, that was in 1867, which was presumably 20, 30 years before, shall we say, the first
Romans,
movements.
Greeks,
The first,
they farmed the land over there.
nobody farmed the land.
Nobody farmed the land.
Nobody. Because the land of Israel only bears fruit for the Jewish people. It's like, it's compared to a Jewish woman. She only has relations with her husband. That's it. She will not produce fruits for anyone else. Look at our own experience today. In 2004, if you would have been mindful to take a trip to Gaza, what would you have seen? Amazing vineyards. You had all these vegetables that were grown in all kinds of ways with no bugs and all hydroponics, right? Ariel Sharon and the Israeli government was arguably the biggest mistake in this century, and gave up land for the purposes of what they thought was going to be peace, even not realizing that you can't make peace with people that hate you, that just, whatever they sign is not worth the paper it's printed on. And so they gave it back. And so what did they do? They, of course, didn't want to leave them with good stuff, so they destroyed it on the way out. What should the Arabs have done? Recognize this is a whole economic center. Replanted, resowed, rebuilt everything that they had. What fruits do you get from Gush Katif now? Nothing. The land of Israel only bears fruit for the Jewish people. And that's throughout all the history. Okay? Just read that innocence abroad. It's amazing. So now, after all these curses in Parashat Bechukotai, what does it say? If we go to chapter 26, verse number 42. V'zacharti et bereti Yaakov. God says, after going through all the terrible things that are going to happen because we went with God in a dispassionate way, all the terrible things that are going to happen, yes? When we confess what we did, yes, what's it to say? V'zacharti et bereti Yaakov. I will remember my covenant with Yaakov. The afet bereti Yitzchak. And also, in addition, I'll remember the covenant with Isaac. The afet bereti Abraham. And I will remember my covenant with Abraham, which means there are 3 covenants here. Each one with a different one of the forefathers. God's going to remember each one individually. And then what does it say? The haaretz iskor. And I will remember the land. Now the next pasuk. The haaretz te'azev mehem. But for now, the land will be bereft of them. The tiretz et shabbatoteha, and she will have her Shabbatot, the Shmitot, that she didn't have because the Jewish people, when they were in the land, didn't follow the Shemitah. Bo shama mehem, when she is desolate from them. Vehem yirtzu et avonam, and they will appease their sin, which means the exile is a type of tshuva, it's a redemption. By going, not a redemption, when you go into the exile, that's a punishment, and punishment helps to remove the sin. Yan uviyan b'mishpatai timasu, because they were reviled by my commandments, or specifically by the chachamim. Ve'et chukotai ga'ala nafsham, and my statutes, they were disgusted by them. So clearly we see here, it's painting a picture. And we can say this is talking about the destruction of the first temple. We can say this is talking about the exile that we're in now. The Ramban says each one's talking about a different exile. You can look at both. Because the end is not talking about the first temple. It's talking about, it's building the second temple, as we'll see. What does this say? Even though there's a covenant. What is a covenant? It's a contract. You're going to do something for me, and I'm going to do something for you. Yes? What happens if we have a contract and I don't fulfill the terms of my contract? You can go to court and you can sue me for a breach of contract with the goal that you don't want to have to fulfill your end of the contract, because a contract is a deal, it's an agreement, and when
to get you to perform.
or to
I take you to court to perform.
or you take me to court because you want to get out of the contract, right? Because a breach of the contract, the contract is null and void. That's not how God works. God makes a contract with you. He fulfills his end of the deal, regardless of whether you fulfill the end of your deal. If you don't fulfill your end of the deal, there are going to be consequences. There's going to be repercussions. But the ultimate promise that is made in the deal, which is the ultimate redemption, that is never removed. As it says, next pasuk, the af gamzot. And even with all this, which means all of these terrible things that have happened, these curses and the destruction, and then getting thrown out of the land of Israel, biotam be'eretz oivehem, when they are in the land of their enemies, which means they're in the exile. Lo me'astim, even though they were disgusted by me, I won't be disgusted with them. V'lo ge'altim lechalotam, and I will not be so despised of them that I will destroy them. Lehafer briti itam, to cancel my end of the bargain with them. Which them? The bargain he made with Yaakov, the bargain he made with Yitzchak, and the bargain he made with Abraham. And what is the bargain he made with the forefathers?
That we're going to be a small nation, but we're going to be numerous, and there will be an end of days.
The ultimate bargain he made with the forefathers is, you guys, the forefathers, are going to inherit the land. Abraham in his life, did he inherit any land in the land of Israel? No. Yitzchak in his life, did he inherit any land in the land of Israel? No. Yeah, other than the burial place called Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Yes? Yaakov, he didn't inherit anything. He won Shechem through fighting, as it says in Breshit. Yes? But he didn't inherit anything. God promised to each one of them that they would inherit the land. But in their life, they never inherited the land. We say this in the Kriyat Shema. It says in Masechet Sanhedrin that a mitzvah is a requirement for a Jew to believe in Tchiyat HaMetim. It's one of the 13 things that the Rambam brings as a requirement of Judaism, yes? Even though there are various Rishonim that break up the requirements of belief differently, the bottom line is a Jew that does not believe in the resurrection of the dead, en lo chelek le'olam haba. We talked about whoever can lose a portion in the world to come. How can a Jew lose a portion? By not believing in the resurrection of the dead. But it's not enough for the Jew to believe in the resurrection of the dead. They have to believe that the resurrection of the dead is written in the Torah. Now, if you're going to tell me written in the Tanakh, there's places I can look. I might go to Yechezkel, chapter 37, talks about the dry bones. We could say that might be we're talking about the resurrection of the dead. No, a Jew is required to believe that the resurrection of the dead is written in the Torah. Where? So the Gemara goes through a whole bunch of proof text, tries to show, and multiple ones of it, but there's one the Gemara settles on, and it settles in not my opinion, but I think, and other people, is because this is something we say every single day, twice a day. In the Kriyat Shema, what does it say? Leman yiribu yimechem, so that the days of your children will be lengthened, your days, yimei benechem, and the days of your children, al ha'adama, on the land, asher nishba, with an ayin. What does nishba with an ayin mean? That God swore, la'avotechem, to your fathers.
To give to you.
Is that what it says? To give to you? You've already made a mistake.
Give to them.
It doesn't say latet lachem. It says latet lahem. You have to look at the pasuk, and that's why it's so important to understand. Which means God made a promise, his covenant that's discussed here, that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are going to have to receive the land as a Yerusha. How? That's correct. Minayin l'tchiyat hametim in Torah, from that pasuk. That pasuk teaches us Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov have to come back alive to receive the land. This is the covenant that's discussed here.
But then it would be the same in the pasuks where God promises to give them the land.
No, sometimes it doesn't say. It says to give it to your children. It doesn't. It says to give it to you and your children. Okay, so you might understand from Breshit, giving it to your children is like giving it to you. No, that's the mistake. Because it's a disquieting that they live their lives with a promise that God made to give them land that they never received. Avraham Avinu, when he wanted to bury his wife, did he have a piece of property that he could bury her on? No, he had to buy it.
But if God gave him the money to buy it with, and we have to serve
There's a
God
big
with all
difference
that
between
stuff,
buying land and inheriting land. You could buy a house. There's a big difference when mom and dad move on to the next world, whenever after 120 years, and you inherit a house. Which one feels better? Inheritance is nice. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, it's nice. We want them to live as long as they can, but when
It's nice.
but it's nice. Okay, look at King Charles. This guy was waiting for 60 years for his mother to die. Almost to the point where he said it. He said it after he was like relieved that she finally died. Now he could become the king. This poor guy was a prince for 60 years because the old woman wouldn't die. So we understand Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were promised they would inherit the land. They would receive it. And they did not receive it in their life. And that's what's being discussed here. I will not cancel my covenant with the forefathers or with them. Ki ani Adonai Elohechem. Because I am Yud Kei Vav Kei, you're their God.
It follows through.
Yud Kei Vav Kei, Ne'eman L'Shalem. What does Yud Kei Vav Kei mean? Trustworthy to pay. Trustworthy to pay if a person deserves.
Good or bad?
Or good or bad, exactly. Trust Ne'eman L'Shalem. Okay? And if it's good, he can put that in the bank better than he can his dollars and better than he can gold. If Yud Kei Vav Kei has made a promise, that is as good as it's in your hand already. Continuing next pasuk. V'zacharti lahem brit rishonim. I will remember for them the covenant with the first ones. Who's the covenant with the first ones? Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And then Asher Hotzeiti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, that I took out their children from the land of Egypt. Le'enei hagoyim. What does it mean le'enei hagoyim? In the eyes of all the nations, for them all to see. Liot lahem le'elohim ani Adonai. To be for them a God. I am Yud Kei Vav Kei. Which goyim is this talking about? At simple, it's talking about Paro and the nations of the world. But this pasuk is talking about the future. I'm going to remember the covenant that I made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And I took them out of the land of Egypt. In the eyes of the goyim, just like I took them out of the land of Egypt. In the eyes of the goyim, in the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, I'm going to take them out of the land of all the lands of the exile. Le'enei goyim. When? In the time of the Mashiach. Every Christian in the world reads this pasuk
And thinks Yoshka's coming.
This is not talking about This is not talking about Christians. This is talking about Jews. Le'enei goyim. Okay, there's some Christians that think they're the new Israel. Okay, they could be psychotic. Okay, they're not the new Israel. But look at this pasuk. Now, with this, we'll finish up. What's the concept of a haftarah? Why do we have a haftarah? Haftorah. Why do we have that? What's the beginning? We know Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people that they have to read the Torah Monday and Thursday and Shabbat. Right? Moshe Tiken, he established from Gzerah, not from Shamayim, right? From his rabbinical abilities, not from his prophetic abilities, that the Jewish people would have to read the Torah Monday, Thursday, and Mincha and Shabbat. Why?
Make sure they kept reading.
Vayelchu shloshet yamim. They went for 3 days and they didn't have water. Water and mayim el Torah. So the Talmud says what? Moshe Rabbeinu saw they went 3 days, didn't have water. That was the problem. So if a Jew goes 3 days without Torah, then there's Amalek. Then there's problems. There's complaints. We said that yesterday. Amelim ba Torah. So he established that Monday, Thursday, there is never a time, if a Jew is going to Bet Knesset, there's never a time that 3 days goes by and he's not hearing the words of the Sefer Torah.
Is Amelim and Amalek related? The two
No.
words are related?
It's just 3 letters that are the same. So what is the concept of a haftarah? When did that start? Moshe Rabbeinu did not establish haftarah. When was haftarah started? So the Rambam discusses this, and he says, in the time of the Chashmonaim,
The Greeks.
the Chashmonaim, which are the Yehuda Maccabi, when the Greeks were preventing the Jews from studying the Torah, which means the Greeks would post guards. They would send them to the synagogue, especially on Shabbat when they knew everybody gathered. Not everybody went Monday and Thursday. They were working. They had to work in the fields, yes? But everybody went to shul on Shabbat. So they would post guards in the synagogue on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, because the Jews are not working on those days, so they're all coming to the synagogue. No excuse. You don't have to be in the fields at sunrise, so therefore you got to be in shul, yes? And they would post guards and prevent them from reading the Torah. But they didn't prevent them from reading the Tanakh. Just the Torah. Why? Because the Torah contains the mitzvot. The goal of the Greeks was to stamp out what? Stamp out the mitzvot. We don't learn mitzvot from the Tanakh, so they didn't have a problem with us reading the Tanakh. So what did the rabbis do? They established the concept of reading a haftarah. Haftarah are all from the Navi, the prophets. The majority of the haftarot are from Yishaya, the prophet of consolation. Okay? All the 7 that we read in the summertime after Tisha B'Av are all from Yishaya Hanavi, even though the first one is what we read on Chazon, which is on the Shabbat of right before Tisha B'Av, is also from Yishaya. That's the first one, right? But most of Yishaya is not. It's consolation. It's nechama. It's not. Only the first one is a zinger. Okay. So they established reading the haftarah from any book in the Navi, which means Yehoshua, Shoftim, Melachim, Aleph Melachim Bet, Shmuel Al Shmuel Bet, right? And any one of the Treasar, any one of the prophets, Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, and any one of the prophets. No Ketuvim. You don't read Tehillim for the haftarah. You don't read Mishlei for the haftarah. None of that. Only from the book of the Navi. And when they picked the section of the haftarah, what did they do? Why did they pick specific sections? They wanted it to resemble the weekly parasha. So if the Jew was not allowed to read the portion publicly, by looking at the haftarah and studying it, they would understand some of the salient messages they're supposed to be receiving from the parasha. So one of the ways a person can understand what the parasha is telling you is by looking at the haftarah. Looking what the haftarah says, and based on that, why did the rabbis pick that? So when you're reading the haftarah on Shabbat, you're saying, I just finished the parasha. Baruch Hashem, I'm not living in the time of the Greeks, right? I can read the Torah. Why did the rabbis pick this section for me to read now? Because there's a message here from the parasha that I need to know. So now let's look at the haftarah. What did we just discuss? We just said what? we just read that a Jew has to recognize that in the Torah it says that even when we're misbehaving, even when we're in a land that is far away, God is not going to forget his covenant, which means he's going to reestablish the Jewish people in their role. Mamlechet Kohanim Begoy Kadosh. There is no such thing as a replacement of the Jewish people with somebody else. That is not how God operates, as he made a promise in the Torah. So what does the Haftarah say? And since this is my Bar Mitzvah parasha, it's one of my favorite 3 Pisukim in the entire Tanakh. Go to Haftarah for Bechukotai.
Where's that end? Huh?
And if the Pisukim in the parasha weren't clear enough of what we just discussed, these Pisukim are as clear as can be. And remember, every Christian and every Muslim, every Christian in the world reads and understands that this is the word of God. Let's see what it says. Adonai, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, meaning what? Why Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? Ne'eman l'shalem, we just discussed that, yes?
The guy who
Pays. When he makes a promise, he does not welsh. Uzi u'ma'uzi u'minusi b'yom tzara. My strength and my fortitude and my salvation in the day of trouble. What's the day of trouble? The exile.
kicked out. All the days of trouble.
Elecha goyim yava'u. To you, the Gentiles will come. Who's Elecha? That could be talking about to Yerushalayim. That could be talking about to the Jewish people. Me'afse aretz, from the corners of the world. Afse doesn't really mean corners. How does it translate in the art scroll?
From the ends of the earth.
Ends of the earth. Okay. FS means the zero. FS really means zero. There's no corners of the earth. The earth is round. This is one of the places where the people say that, when they want to learn that according to the Tanakh, the world is flat. The word FS doesn't mean corner. But anyway, let's do it alone. The Yomeru. And what are these Gentiles going to say? Which means this is talking about when? This is talking about at the end of the time of trouble, because there's a day of trouble, yes? Maybe we could say it's not a day of trouble for us, it's a day of trouble for them, because it's time for payment. Just like the Egyptians, what happened? God rewarded us, saved us, rescued us, and with the same vehicle on Yam Suf, he destroyed the Egyptians.
They came to the water.
So what's going to happen? It's a day of trouble. Maybe it's not trouble for us, it's trouble for them. Why? Because it's the end of the world as they know it, as REM said. And what are the Gentiles going to say? Ach sheker nahalu avotenu. Only lies did we inherit from our fathers. Who's talking here?
The nations.
The nations. What nations?
Other nations.
The Goyim. They're going to say they inherited lies from their fathers. Hevel. Nonsense. The en bam mo'il. And there is nothing in those words that we inherited that have any type of value.
Avodah Zarah. They're talking about their Avodah Zarah, no?
Let's see specifically what it's talking about. Remember, this was written, this is from Jeremiah, which was about 80 years before the destruction, 50 years, 60 years, and during the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash. Yes? Okay. What are the Goyim going to say? So now the first they're going to recognize, the first thing they're going to say is, we inherited lies from our fathers. And what are they going to recognize of those lies? Hayase lo Adam Elohim vehema lo Elohim. Can a man make himself into a god? And they are not gods. Does that remind anybody of a religion?
Right.
We have a religion that turned a man into God. We talked about that. Paul over here because of his Gentile upbringing and his Hellenistic culture, made Jesus' death and resurrection, because the key to Christianity is not the crucifixion of Jesus or the birth or his life. The key is the resurrection, and the resurrection into this new being, which is a godly figure, which, if anybody ever studied Roman mythology or Greek mythology, there were lots of god men, right? There were all these concepts of God having relationships with women, humans, and having these god men. Yes, so this is a very pagan idea. But this is 500 years before Christianity. They're going to come and say, we inherited lies from our father. What lie did we inherit? That a man can become God.
Article says, can a man make a God for himself?
Okay, that's one way to interpret it. I'm going to interpret it a little differently. Lachen, next pasuk. Hineni modi'am. Therefore, I will make them know. Bepam hazot, at that very time, in that very whatever. Odiem et yadi vet gvurati. I will show them. Not yeda is something that a person experiences. The concept of yeda, knowledge, is experience. They will experience my hand and my strength. God talking, yes? And what are they going to know? V'yadeu ki shemi Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Who's that talking about?
That I am one.
Hmm?
That he's one and he's going to pay.
Okay, that's correct. Okay, but we already said that the Christians are discussed in the first verse,
Not
right?
Elohim.
That he can't. Can a man become a god? So we understand there's a message to what the Christians are going to say, that they recognize they inherited lives from their fathers. The 2.8 billion Christians in the world will recognize they inherited lives from their fathers. And it's not that their fathers lied to them. They were lied to by their fathers all the way back to the first liar, which of course is Paul. He's the ultimate liar. Great book. Read it. It's called The Mythmaker, written by Hayam Makavi in 1986. Phenomenal book. Incredible. I've read it 4 or 5 times. Okay. And he calls Paul, it's called The Mythmaker. And the whole book is about how Paul invented the invention of Christianity by Paul. Okay? But that's the second pasuk. What is the last pasuk talking about? It's not talking about the Muslims, because the Muslims don't believe that Jesus was a God. They believe he was a prophet.
They are not God.
But the Muslims refer to God as Allah. That's not his name. What's his name? Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. So what lie the Muslims inherited? Yes, they recognize what? They recognize that they believe in one God. But they're calling him by the wrong name. His name is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. What does Yud-Kei Vav-Kei denote? No change. Ani Yud-Kei Vav-Kei lo shaniti. There is no change. In the beginning, if you look at the Quran, there's a name that is mentioned more frequently than any other name. What name is that? Musa. Moses. Moses is the most frequent name in the Quran. Even more than Isa. Isa is Jesus. So we understand what? That they're going to recognize, what is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? My name is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. You guys think that you have it right. No. Yeah, you believe in one God. That's great in a very rudimentary way. But no, it's these people that have had it right the whole time. This totally fits with the parsha that we read. And a Jew looks at this and says, of course that's how it is. And a Christian who looks at this, you show them this pasuk, they're going to read it from the King James Version. It's going to say something that, like you just read from the Art Scroll, can a man make himself gods? And they're going to say, of course, if it can't make God, let's next. How is that the lie that's going to be inherited by the Gentiles at the end? How many Gentiles today in the world, out of 8 billion people, how many of them think that they can make gods out of molten objects? Okay, maybe the Hindus, there's a lot of them.
Why they do the cross?
But the
Look at the
no. Are they going to? They don't think the cross is God.
They pray to Jesus on the
Don't tell me what they
cross.
pray to. They don't think the cross is God. It's a representation of their religion, of the sacrifice, okay, which allowed the resurrection. Yes,
I hear, but they
it's,
don't
it's
think of
in,
the cross as
they don't
God.
think the cross is God. And true Christians who are not pagans, when they're bowing down to the statues in the church, they don't think that's God either. They understand it's a representation. They have, they became from Roman society, which everything was represented by sculpture and things like that. That's why the Protestants removed all the sculptures. You don't see in a church, a Protestant church, you're never going to see sculptures because that's avodah zarah. They were solo scriptura. They went back to the scripture. Which scripture? The Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. And they recognize it talks a lot about statues and graven images and all that kind of stuff. We can't have this in our churches. This is pagan. This is influence from Rome. So the goal of Protestants was to remove all these influences of Rome and Greek and Roman ideas. Okay, but the religion itself is all Greek and Roman theology and some other Gentile theologies. Let's leave that on for now. But what do we see from here? At the end of days, it's talking about all the Gentiles are going to come, and they're all going to recognize that they inherited lives from the Father. And what's the lie they think they inherited from their Father? Can a man make a god out of gold? How many people today living in the world think you could make a man out of a god out of gold? Not too many. The most ignorant, the most backward around. But this is saying, Elecha, the Gentiles are going to come from everywhere, which means all of the Goyim are going to recognize they inherited lies, which means all of the Goyim includes the Christians, includes the Muslims, includes the Hindus, includes all these other ones. And they're all going to recognize they inherited lies. There's only one individual that's not mentioned here. That's the Jewish people. Because they didn't inherit lies. They inherited the truth, which began on Mount Sinai, to this day, unbroken tradition. This is not the only verse in the Bible that says this clearly, but it's directly connected to the parasha. I thought it was valuable to discuss, and we should understand that when we're going to celebrate Shavuot, that we are commemorating the greatest event that happened in history, where God came and gave us His word. To us, Asher B'charbanu, picked us from all the nations. V'natan lanu et Torato. He gave us His Torah. He gave it to us as a gift. And a person who hears that and learns that, how could one not be enthusiastic and excited and passionate about learning his Torah? Any questions?
Fantastic close.
Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.